Joining me now is best-selling author Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with the UK riots. Keir Starmer, the police, the media have all been clear who they blame for the unrest. The far right, they say, fueled by disinformation online. There's even suggestions of banning platforms like X and cracking down further on free speech. Is that the answer to what we are seeing, which are really clearly deep underlying issues in communities across the country, from places like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Rotherham, Middlesbrough, London, and even as far as Belfast in Northern Ireland?
Well, yes, this all started after a young man, a 17-year-old, stabbed to death three girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance party in the town of Southport. And the sense clearly in the immediate aftermath of that, this is just an observation, was that the authorities were withholding the identity of the suspect. Now, there are some reasons why they might do that. But obviously, tensions locally were extremely high, feelings were extremely high. And the way to try to control the information obviously completely backfired, as you would expect it to. And that's led to these riots across city after city in the UK. It's extremely disturbing. These riots of themselves provoked counter riots where identifiably Muslim young men, some armed, have been also shown on camera attacking people in the streets. And this is really just a completely appalling, and I'm sorry to say this, completely predictable situation. Indeed, I can say it's predictable because I said exactly this sort of thing would start happening 7 years ago or so in my book, The Strange Death of Europe. It's horrible to be proved right in such circumstances because you don't want to be proved right about something like this. You want people to listen and change their policies. But, you know, the last few days have shown the Labour government refusing to concede that there is anything other than what they call far-right violence going on. They claim that there isn't a two-tier policing system in the UK, which everybody with their own eyes can see is not the case. Clearly, there is a two-tier policing system in the UK. These areas where this has happened in, what's more, are all areas where there were riots in 2011. And as I write in The Spectator this week, one of the interesting things about that is that all of these areas are, among other things, areas where migration has continued to increase and joblessness has gone up. Now, just think of those two factors, anyone watching. You keep forcing immigration onto these areas, and you do nothing to improve the lot in these areas. Of course, nobody should be on the streets. The unbelievable hooliganism and thuggery of recent days should repel everybody. But, you know, very often when there is some kind of violence or unrest, we hear political leaders and the wise heads in the commentariat saying we need to address underlying causes. Why has nobody said that in recent days?
And you're so right. I remember the media coverage in 2011, very different to what we're seeing now, and also throughout the BLM unrest that we saw not too long ago. Again, there was a great deal of sympathy for those who were behaving violently and certainly weren't peacefully protesting. Now, there are various segments of the left in the UK blaming X, formerly Twitter, for inciting violence. But Douglas, it's one of the few places where you can see what is happening on the ground without that media spin.
That's right, Rita. I mean, I've just seen a report from another so-called mainstream channel in the UK where the quite clearly the journalists are trying not to reveal part of the story. What they're trying not to reveal is what they call Asian men in the area intimidating and harassing journalists. Well, these aren't, you know, once again, you get back to the endless euphemism and lying that is just prevalent across our media. These are not, you know, Hong Kong residents who have decided to go out and threaten people. They are, regrettably, organized Muslim groups. And, they're being whipped up by people, presumably in their community, but also by left wing and other activists, obviously by the people on the street as well, to come out in force.
Mm.
Now, the idea that the answer to that is to crack down on Twitter, X, is an absolute case study of the failure of the political class in the UK. I remember in 2017 when three Muslim men went across London Bridge, slitting people's throats and shouting, "This is for Allah." And the mayor of London and the then Prime Minister, Theresa May, came out and said that we need to address online radicalization. And then Theresa May set up somebody to look into the definition of extremism. What have they actually done in all of these years? Absolutely nothing. And it'll be the same with this. They'll lock some people up, and they will demonize all sorts of people, and they'll cover for others, but they will do nothing to address this. The British public have been begging for years for consecutive governments to bring down immigration and to increase opportunities in the UK. Not only were they not listened to, they were reviled, insulted, and much more. And, it also needs to be said, each of the towns in which these awful riots have been occurring are all places that are resonant with huge crimes that were covered up by almost everybody in authority. I'm thinking of what are called the grooming gangs, but are the rape gangs, which struck in Rotherham, in Rochdale, in town after town, whose names are back in the news now. And obviously, there's no excuse for the rioting. Why does nobody in government, and a Labour government at that, not listen to these people, at least find out what has gone so badly wrong in these areas, that reports of who carried out this atrocity in Southport at the dance class for children, that could ignite a country? It doesn't suggest to me that the country is in a healthy state.
No, and I think trust in institutions, including the police and media, are going to plummet further after this episode. Now, let's talk about the Olympic boxing scandal involving two males with XY chromosomes who are being allowed to punch on with real women at the Paris Games. It hasn't escaped your attention this week. You wrote in the New York Post about the IOC's failures and how young women who have worked tirelessly to reach the pinnacle of their sport are having their dreams dashed. And Douglas, whether it's by men who transition like Leah Thomas, or in the case of these two boxers, males with the XY chromosomes who, due to having disorders in sex development, were raised as girls, were observed to be girls when they were born, it looks like, in these two cases. In either circumstance, it's just grossly unfair for real women. There are differences between men and women. That's why we have two separate categories. And if someone has an XY chromosome, they should not, in my mind, be allowed anywhere near a women's competition.
No, and it's just extraordinary that we've got here. I mean, I think it's 11 years now since Joe Rogan identified this problem in MMA fighting, where a man who transitioned into being a woman and who was in the US Navy, and then, by the way, worked as a trucker to save up money for the sex change operation, went into female MMA fighting and was just, punching the hell out of the women that he was competing against. And that's 11 years ago since that scandal blew up. And as all of this is so connected, isn't it, Rita? Either there's the reality and you accept it, or you're made to just go along with something that is just unsustainable. It is not sustainable for men to be put in a ring with women in boxing competitions and not be expected to beat the hell out of the woman in question. And then obviously any sane person would say, aren't we against men beating up women for sport or anything else? And the answer is yes, except apparently at the Olympic Games. And this is just the sort of thing that deranges a society. About the only laugh I've got this week was when, notice that I think it was in the pole vaulting, that there was a gentleman whose whose how can I say this politely, whose member was somewhat large
Oh,
and
yeah.
not tucked in, and caused a certain problem for him. And much amusement for others. But I was pleased to see yesterday a cartoon of somebody reporting this, and the man's wife says, "But is that the men's pole vaulting or the women's pole vaulting?" Only, only in the Olympics in 2024 would you have to ask that question. The whole thing is absurd. And I do hope the IOC looks at this again. It's totally unfair. Anyone, I mean, I know, again, we're not meant to mention anything that's in front of our eyes, but anyone who knows anything about male and female development knows that even if you go onto some kind of hormone drug at some stage, if you've gone through development as a teenager, as a man, you're going to have larger hands, larger shoulders. You're going to have a different bone density. You're going to have much more strength, all sorts of things. And it's just a fact. So I suppose decent people have to decide, do we actually want to encourage a delusion to rule over everything, or can we just get some sanity back?
Well, at the IOC, at Olympic level, any elite level, there is just so much testing for illegal drugs. I don't know why they just don't reinstate the gender testing, the sex testing that they used to have before they decided they're disgraceful and not politically correct. And then there is no doubt whether someone has a disorder of sex development, is intersex, is transitioned, whatever the case may be. If they've got XY chromosomes, they will be eliminated from the women's competition. And we all know where we stand. But the misinformation and the gaslighting we've seen this week has been quite astonishing. Now, I've got to ask you before you go about Kamala Harris and her choice of running mate. She's picked the far-left governor of Minnesota. This is a man who made headlines for signing legislation to put tampons in boys' restrooms in schools. He backed the BLM riots even as they destroyed Minneapolis, and who said he'd provide giant ladders, Douglas, so illegal immigrants could climb any wall Donald Trump built. This choice is astonishing. What do you make of Tim Walz as a future Veep?
Well, it's interesting when this happens, is that the whole world's media attention turns onto Tim Walz. And you've already listed some of the really, I mean, I think just indefensible things that he's done in his career. Of course, he will now pretend to be somebody else, just as Kamala tries to pretend to be somebody else. But, remember the intense scrutiny of J.D. Vance once Trump nominated him as his Veep choice. It was very, very interesting because, of course, everybody goes over every single little thing that Vance has ever said, and they find something that offends some people, and then they blow it up. We should expect the same thing to be happening with Tim Walz in the coming days, and we'll see if it does. But it ought to. And, all of this stuff that you've just listed, the bananas stuff about tampons and boys' bathrooms and the BLM riot stuff and else, if he tries to run as a law and order candidate, I would expect him to get a certain amount of pushback. But some of the media being what it is, maybe we won't. Maybe he'll be able to reinvent himself just as Kamala has been able to reinvent herself as a sparklingly innovative, brilliant, successful, dynamic, and inspiring political leader who will lead the free world in the 21st century.
Oh, look, I'm sure the media protection racket will be in full swing, but just the fact that she did not pick the most obvious candidate, which may have secured her Pennsylvania, and it seems to be, Douglas, purely because of fears that picking a Jewish man who has been pro-Israel was going to cause all sorts of divisions within the Democrats, perhaps even see unrest at the Democrat National Convention. I mean, the Democrats appear to have an anti-Semitism problem that runs a lot deeper than just the squad.
Well, it's interesting. Josh Shapiro was the name on everyone's lips. He's a very impressive politician, or quite an impressive politician, I should say. He did have to do the full grovel when it turned out that at the age of 20, he had said that the Palestinians may not want peace all that much. He rode that back and apologized for being correct at the age of 20 and made sure that he was now incorrect, and it still didn't get him the nomination. Yes, I mean we'll see. I mean, is Tim Walz able to bolster Kamala Harris's credentials on foreign policy questions? We're going to see, aren't we? But if there's any weakness there, I would very much hope that it would be exposed, as it would on either side. This is 90 days left of this, and as you know, and everyone watching knows, these are long weeks at the moment in which anything can happen. And 3 months is a heck of a long time in Kamala world, and we don't need her to explain to us quite how long time can be.
No, please not. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.